21 years ago this week, on April 13th, 2000, one of the most bizarre matches in history, where a WWE contracted wrestler beat a WCW contracted wrestler to win the ECW World title on an ECW show. The story is that Mike Awesome, then the ECW World Champion, was not getting paid, as I'm sure a lot of guys in ECW were not, either being paid or they were owed a lot of back pay at that time by Paul Heyman. So while he was the ECW champion, that's true, Awesome approached his cousin, Horace Hogan, who was with WCW at the time. When Horace found out about his money issues with ECW, he went to Hulk. And Hulk helped get Mike Awesome into WCW. Paul Heyman insisted that Awesome did have a contract. Eric Bischoff on his podcast said that was not true. Heyman approached Vince McMahon with the idea of using Taz, who had left ECW already. He had only debuted in WWE a few months earlier. But, by then they had already given up on him. He approached Vince McMahon about using Taz for a match with Mike Awesome to get the title off of him, and then having Taz drop the belt to Tommy Dreamer. Vince McMahon was fine with that, and Heyman worked things out with WCW's legal department for Mike Awesome to work the match and drop the belt, which led to the match here in Indianapolis. Awesome showed up to the building with Doug Dillinger, WCW's head of security. He never came through the locker room out of fear that the ECW roster might do something to him over the way he left the company. There were a lot of people who were very unhappy with him and the way he conducted himself. Instead, he entered through the crowd, which is the same way he left when the match was over. Jeff Jones was Awesome's manager at the time. He issued an open challenge to anyone in the back who wanted to step up and challenge for the ECW championship. Taz answered the call, entered to a gigantic pop to his WWF entrance music. The match lasted a little over a minute. Taz wins with the Taz mission. Awesome gets right back up, just totally no-sells it to go leave. He wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. He wanted to be anywhere but there. A little over a week later at ECW's CyberSlam show, Taz dropped the title to Tommy Dreamer, who was then immediately beaten for it by Just Incredible when Francine turned on Dreamer. But not before Vince McMahon booked Taz as the ECW champion to wrestle Triple H as the WWE champion in a champion versus champion match on SmackDown. Tommy Dreamer got involved, accidentally hit Taz with a chair that was intended for Triple H, which cost Taz the match and he was pinned. Now you can look at this one of two ways. It was a way to build heat between Taz and Dreamer ahead of their CyberSlam match a few days later, or it made Taz look weak and the ECW title look inferior, pinning their champion. And they were in ECW's home market, no less, for that SmackDown taping. They were in Philadelphia. And they had Triple H, the WWF champion, pin Taz, the ECW champion. And Taz did look weak. And Vince McMahon himself, on the rise and fall of ECW DVD, when asked why he booked that match in the first place, admitted that he had no idea why they did that. I'll tell you why he did that. He can play dumb all he wants to. I'll tell you right now why he did that. It was quite the sly move on his part. In the span of about a week, he had one of his contracted talents beat a WCW star to win the ECW title, only to then lose on television to the WWE champion. And I'm supposed to believe that he didn't know what he was doing? There was a lot of heat on Awesome from the ECW locker room, and even Joey Styles, when Awesome appeared at the ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view, the first one against Masato Tanaka, he went off on what a Judas he was, and when Awesome hit a suicide dive early in the match out to the floor, Joey Styles on commentary said, "Oh, it's a shame he didn't actually take his own life," which just makes me cringe thinking about that when you consider that Awesome really did take his own life just 2 years later. I mean, he couldn't have known that, but still, it's like, man, talk about a stiff shot. But the fact is, he was owed a lot of money. I cannot begrudge the guy for doing what he felt he had to do. Now, was there a better way to go about doing it to try to protect ECW a little bit more? Yeah, I guess so. But if the guy isn't being paid, or if he's not being paid what he was promised, then you do what you got to do. Self-preservation, man. You got to look out for yourself sometimes. You got to take care of number one before you take care of number 2, 3, and 4. That's life. That match with Tanaka, by the way, is one of the craziest matches I've ever seen. Best match of that entire One Night Stand pay-per-view, which I loved. That ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view, the first one, is one of my all-time, probably top 3 favorite WWE pay-per-views that they've ever done. 2 days later, on April 15th, 2000, contrary to people thinking that he did not return to the ring until his match with Triple H at SummerSlam in 2002, it was on this date, actually weeks earlier, but it aired locally on this date, on TWA Total Impact, which aired Saturday nights, I believe. Shawn Michaels wrestled his first match since WrestleMania 14, but it did not happen in a WWE ring. During his time away from the company, Michaels started a school, the Texas Wrestling Academy, which turned out students like Bryan Danielson, Brian Kendrick, Paul London, Lance Cade. In fact, there was an article about the school around this time in the San Antonio Express-News that featured Daniel Bryan bragging about the fact that he had suffered 3 concussions in the span of 3 months. Oof. But Michaels also started a promotion, the Texas Wrestling Alliance. And in the TWA on this date, Michael stepped into the ring for a bunkhouse brawl hardcore match against his old tag team partner, Paul Diamond, going by the name Venom. Nobody outside of that one market in Texas even knew that this match existed until many years later. And even then, it was years before footage of the match finally surfaced online. I mean, now you can find it on YouTube, but it probably wasn't until the last 7 or 8 years that you could even watch this match on the internet. Now, I've seen the match. Michaels hardly took any bumps, but he looked good, and he was moving around fine, and he won with a super kick, regaining control of his company and holding the TWA heavyweight title, which he subsequently vacated. In a WWE.com interview in 2015, he was asked, "Did you ever compete in the TWA?" And he said, "We did. One little thing where I had a hardcore street fight match. I was also the color commentator and the producer of the show, but I did do one match, which was a drawn-out decision when you hear you'll never wrestle again, and if you do, something serious could happen. I wasn't going to wreck myself. If I'm going to do something to take that risk, it's going to be for WWE, but we felt like it was the situation where I wouldn't have to get too physical." And he says it was camouflaged quite well. I would say so, considering that hardly anybody even knew that this happened until many years later. 2 days after that, man, there was a lot of stuff going on that week. But 2 days later, on April 17th, 2000, Raw is War was in State College, Pennsylvania, and Chris Jericho challenged Triple H for the WWE Championship. Jericho just talked about this match during his Broken Skull Sessions interview with Steve Austin. And also on Talk is Jericho last summer, in Jericho's own words, he was this close to quitting the company. Credit to Wrestling Inc. for the transcription here. The week before, on Sunday Night Heat, they had me lose to Viscera. And at the end of that match, I walked out and was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going back there next week and I'm going to go talk to Vince. I'm just going to tell him I'm finished, because if this is what they brought me in here to start losing to Big Vis on a jobber show like Sunday Night Heat, then there's no future for me here. So I get into town, it was State College, PA, and I'm walking down the hall. I'm pissed like I've been working myself up all week. And now I'm ready to just let it all out. I'm walking down the hallway and I see one of the writers. His name was Tommy Blacha. He was standing there and he's like, "Chris, what's going on?" I was like, "I'm going to go talk to Vince." And he goes, "Well, let me tell you what you're doing tonight first." He goes, "I don't really care what I'm doing. I've had enough of this place. I'm going to go tell Vince that I want out." He's like, "Well, you're going to want to hear what you're doing." And I'm like, "I don't care what I'm doing. It doesn't matter." He goes, "You're winning the world title." And I said, "Wow, you better tell me what I'm doing then." He's like, "No, here's what we're going to do. You're going to pick a fight with Hunter. You'll pick a fight with Stephanie. And then you'll do the match and you'll win. And then you'll have to give it back. And at the time, I was like, whatever you want. This is great. I remember feeling a little weird about having to just give the title back. So I asked Vince about that. I said, Vince, I feel really weird about just giving the belt back. What's the mindset? He's like, it's just the story for tonight. You're going to have it again anyways. So don't worry about it. Just take it and do it and go from there. This is one of my favorite segments in Raw history, the Phantom title change. Really, that whole first hour of Raw that night was fantastic television and fantastic storytelling. Mike Chioda was the referee. He gets bumped. Down comes Earl Hebner to replace him. Earl and Triple H, they end up in a shoving match, and down goes Earl. Jericho hits a spinning heel kick. He hits a lion salt. Hebner fast counts him for the 3. And only 8 months into the company, Chris Jericho is the WWE champion. Place came unglued. But only through one commercial break. They come back. We see Triple H in the back, dragging Earl Hebner from the locker room back down to the ring. He forces him to reverse the decision, which Earl only agrees to do if Triple H and Stephanie agree to never put their damn hands on him again. So long as I'm a WWF official, you can't put your damn hands on me again. Those were the key words. As long as I'm a WWF official. And so Triple H and Stephanie, who they had been abusing their power on TV for a while before this, they go, sure, we agree to that. And Earl goes and he retrieves the belt from Jericho. He reverses his decision, straps the belt around Triple H's waist. And then the asshole heel that he is, Triple H says to Earl, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, you're fired. And now that he's no longer a WWF official, he kicks his ass and he gives him a pedigree. A few segments later, Linda McMahon announced that Stone Cold Steve Austin would be returning from neck surgery for the first time to appear in The Rock's corner for the title match at Backlash. And I have never heard a crowd react this way to an announcement. This was not a match. This was not somebody making their entrance. This was not theme music hitting. This was Linda McMahon, the most bland executive in the entire company, standing in the middle of the ring announcing that Stone Cold Steve Austin is going to come back at the next pay-per-view. And the people went nuts. 2 of the biggest crowd pops in WWE history belong to Linda McMahon, of all people, for this and when she kicked Vince in the nuts at WrestleMania X7. 14 years ago this week, on the April 16th, 2007 episode of Monday Night Raw, it was the Miracle in Milan, the first ever televised Raw from Italy. Vince McMahon was only a few weeks removed from getting his head shaved at WrestleMania, and he was out there. he was wearing this hat. Oh my God. I mean, we went through like do-rag Vince. We went through a few different stages of Vince post WrestleMania 23. On this show, he was wearing a hat. It made him look like one of Al Capone's henchmen in some 1920s gangster movie. He said Bobby Lashley wasn't here after the beating he suffered at the hands of Umaga a week earlier, so he threw out an open challenge to anyone in the back who wanted a shot at Umaga's Intercontinental title. No holds barred. And when nobody came out, because apparently the WWE locker room at the time was filled with a bunch of wusses, he looked out into the crowd to find one of the locals, one of the civilians in the audience who wanted to get in the ring, and that is when he found Santino Marella. Santino had spent time in Ohio Valley Wrestling. He wasn't there very long. I think he was only there for a few weeks before he had his little incident with Jim Cornette, where he famously got slapped. He got paintbrushed by Cornette after laughing at the Boogeyman in an angle in OVW where Cornette was trying to get the Boogeyman character over, and he told all the wrestlers to act frightened. And Cornette went off on him in the back, and he slapped him around. Ended up getting suspended because of it. Lost his job not long after that, but there were already issues on both ends between Cornette and WWE, and I guess that was just the final straw for both sides. But during his time down in developmental, Santino had been portraying this Russian shooter-type character called Boris Alexiev. And Paul Heyman had pushed for him to go to the ECW roster. He would have been a protege of Kurt Angle's who would have eventually turned on him, but he was overruled by the powers that be. They didn't like that idea. But in any event, Mike Bucci, Simon Dean, he was the one who called Marella when he was still in OVW, and he asked him, he goes, "You're Italian, right?" Well, he's not, but he said he was. He had studied some Italian language tapes, like cassette tapes, years earlier, so maybe Bucci knew of that somehow. I don't know why he would have thought the guy was Italian. But on the phone, Santino recites some phrases for him in Italian, and that was enough to convince them that he could speak Italian, even though he was barely conversational in it. He got the phone call on Friday. He flew out to Italy on Saturday. He landed on Sunday, and he debuted on Monday. That's how fast things came together. And when Bobby Lashley did show up and he bashed Umaga in the head with a chair, he placed Santino on top of Umaga, and Santino Marella, in his very first match on Monday Night Raw, won the Intercontinental Championship. And he went on to have a very fruitful career, not as anyone to be taken seriously, but as a total comedy character. There were a ton of comedic moments involving Santino over the years. My personal favorite is the Tea Time with Santino in the UK, when it was him and Vladimir Kozlov and Sheamus, where Sheamus was corpsing at one point on camera because, I mean, how could you not? I don't know how he even managed to keep a straight face. So there's a lot of fun Santino moments over the years. Just don't mention any of them to Jim Cornette. And that is this week in wrestling history.